Well, hello there and welcome. You are listening to the Kindness Matters podcast, and I am your host, Mike Rathbun. What is this podcast all about? It's about kindness. It's a pushback against everything negative that we see in the news and on social media today, and it's a way to highlight people, organizations that are simply striving to make their little corner of the world a little better place. If you want to join in on the conversation, feel free. Go ahead and follow us on all of your social media feeds. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We're even on LinkedIn under Mike Rathbun. Check us out. And in the meantime, so sit back, relax, enjoy, and we'll get into the Kindness Matters podcast. Hey, good morning. Well, good whatever time you're listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I am so happy to have you. I'm honored that you chose to take some time out of your life to listen to the show. Remember, if there's anything in this podcast that you find moving or inspiring or motivating, please share it with your friends and family and anybody else who you think would benefit from it. So today on our podcast, I have the great honor of welcoming Colleen Bell. Colleen has a distinguished career marked by her service on the board of directors of the Ostara Initiative, where she currently serves as a chair. Her academic contributions are significant, having taught students at Hamline University from 1990 through 2020 in fields such as conflict studies, women's and gender studies, and social justice studies. Among the highlights of her teaching career are the Inside Out courses she conducted in 2017 and 2018 at the Shakopee Correctional Facility. These courses, which included students both from the campus and within the prison, stand out as some of the peak experiences of her career. In addition to her tenure at Hamline University, Colleen has taught at the University of Tulsa, University of Illinois, and the College of St. Scholastica. I knew I was going to mess that one up. Beyond her academic endeavors, she is also a dedicated gardener and a writer, currently focusing on unlearning academic speak to embrace a more authentic expression of her thoughts and ideas. Thank you so much for taking the time, Colleen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Not bad for AI, huh?
Not bad, yes.
Oh, that was the first time I have ever had AI write an introduction for me. It was okay. I didn't speak so well, but the intro itself was okay. So let's talk about, we were going to talk mostly about Ostara and what they do, but this is more of a general conversation about basically women in the judicial system, right?
Yeah, I call it the criminal legal system because justice is so often missing.
Got it.
Especially when you think about individual women who are impacted by the system.
Yeah, and we tend to group, and we all do it, I think, to a certain extent. You go women, criminal justice system, and you take the individuality, you take the human being out of that. Mm-hmm. And that's where we tend to get into trouble, I think.
Yeah.
So talk about what does Ostara do and how did it start?
Mm-hmm. Well, it did start in Minnesota at Shakopee. This was in about, I think, 2010. Erica Garrity, who continues to lead Ostara, started the Minnesota Prison Doula Project with Raylene Baker. Both doulas, both recognizing some of the issues that affect babies long-term when their moms are incarcerated during their birth. So one thing that happens in women's facilities is, especially when staffing is short, women are scheduled to give birth by C-section rather than having a natural birth. That is bad, we know, in the long term for women's health, but also for babies. Um, so the rate of C-sections in the nation actually is much higher now than in Shakopee itself,
Interesting.
largely due to doulas teaching courses about prenatal care, and working closely with the Department of Corrections to show how doula care and natural birth is actually a big money saver for the state. So C-sections cost a lot more than natural births. So that is a major problematic health trend that's been turned around in Minnesota. That's not true everywhere. So the prison doula program started, the one that started in Minnesota, also involved working against shackling women during labor and delivery.
Wait,
And
so
that's
women were shackled during labor and delivery?
pregnant women. Imagine someone who's 9 months pregnant, who's not gone into labor yet, probably, but put in a van to be transported to the local hospital. Belly chains with wrists chained to the belly and ankle chains. It's the American Medical Association has made it very clear that this is such a risk to moms, to babies, and liability, frankly, for the Department of Corrections. So that has been changed in many states. There are still 10 states, though, that have no prohibitions, no laws about shackling pregnant women.
That's crazy. And yeah, nothing like pointing out a cost savings to get somebody to perk up and take notice, right?
Exactly.
So now, and you guys, you were not satisfied with just Minnesota. You expanded this initiative, correct?
True, true. I think that was not necessarily an initial goal, but gosh, I'm not sure of the year, but at one point, Tutwiler Prison, the state prison for women in Alabama, was called out for custodial rape. In other words, women who are incarcerated going in not pregnant, but becoming impregnated while they're there. The Bureau of Prisons and the Department of Justice at the federal level gave Alabama notice. If you don't clean this up, we will come in and take over. At that point, people in Alabama reached out to the folks in Minnesota about maternal and child health inside prisons. So we now partner with the Alabama Prison Birth Project, and they actually, Tutwiler is now one of the cutting edge prisons in the nation when it comes to lactation. So they now have a breast pumping room, milk, so the moms can pump milk after they've given birth, and they are separated from their babies, but the milk gets to the babies outside the prison. That was true in Alabama before it was true in Minnesota. It is now true in Minnesota.
That's a
But
good thing.
Alabama, surprised everyone by taking the lead there.
Yeah, it's just kind of a human decency thing, isn't it? I mean, to give women their own space, if you will, to pump milk for their babies.
And
Eh,
I think if you think about the babies as the people who will eventually be in charge of this society, it makes no sense to punish them. They have done nothing wrong. And, the whole, I've heard people say when a woman is incarcerated, a whole family is incarcerated. And there are some local groups that are working on the notion that the community is affected, because very often what women are doing in the community is organizing, supporting, doing home care, And so when you pull someone out, it's not punishing just her kids or the immediate family. There are many more people who are affected.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, if you think about all the ways that the women impact communities, it's just, and I mean, to be fair, we're not saying that no woman should ever not go to prison, or
No,
that.
and I think most incarcerated women with whom I've been in touch, in class or otherwise, would not say they don't want to take responsibility. The question is more one of um, the way, for example, the way some prisons in Europe do this is think about the sanctity of the mother child bond, not just from a physical health perspective, but a mental health perspective, a community perspective, a longer term perspective. And so babies are not separated from their moms in many European prisons. Um, that's maybe another conversation, but um, a group of people from Ostara did travel to some European prisons last year, and we'll be coming out with a white paper on that, what we learned there in 2025. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Oh, so they provide space for the child and the mother to be imprisoned at the same time.
They live
Imprisoning kids doesn't
together.
sound
They
right,
wear
but
street clothes. They eat together. Kids leave and go to school and come back. Yeah,
so, and yeah, you've got a kind of a double edged sword there. I mean, if somebody's listening to this and they think, "Oh wow, the kid's in prison too,"
yeah,
but they're with their mom,
yes. And the
so
conditions are not like they are in our prisons. It's viewed as a temporary way of repaying community for harm inflicted. And in this society, largely, it's very difficult to outlive your punishment. Even if you're only in for a year, you still will have trouble getting a driver's license, getting a job, getting housing. Um, it's just extremely difficult to reenter society.
sure, absolutely. So now, do you just work with federal prisons, or is it others?
We started with Shakopee, which is the state prison for women. And most of our other facilities are in the states. But we also work with 3 counties in Minnesota, um, and 5 federal prisons. So overall, we have 19 different facilities where we serve clients across 7 different states.
And I guess Oregon just joined as well.
That's right. Oregon, oh my goodness. And in that facility, women actually wear their own clothes. They're not uniforms. Um,
Talk
yeah,
about human decency thing, allowing a a convicted person to wear their own clothing. That's got to be huge
yeah.
for their own mental health.
The morale is, yeah, it makes a huge difference.
So, and I think most people probably don't even really think too much about women in prison, and there
Yes.
might be a lot of myths or
Oh boy.
misunderstandings. Can you maybe go
Yes,
through some of those?
sure. I mean, the first thing is if we think about people who are incarcerated in the US, we are by far the largest incarcerating um, nation.
Yeah,
Let
we're
me
right
say
up
it that
there
way. We're at
with
the top.
incarcerating our own citizens.
And most US states also incarcerate more people than the most incarcerating nations. So, the Prison Policy Initiative is a nonprofit that puts together some very interesting charts. If people want to compare their own state's incarceration level with various countries elsewhere in the world, that is the place to go. But also just thinking about what people don't know or understand or think about women in prison. Um, only about 7% of people who are locked up in the United States are women. And prisons were designed for men by men. So, and the fact that only 7% of people incarcerated are female makes it very difficult. Well, it makes it easy for people to ignore the
I was going to say
female,
that makes it easier for them
yeah,
to not
the
think about it.
female justice impacted folks. But there's another. This is still kind of on the broad general scheme of things. About 2 million people in this country are behind bars, 7% of which are women. But that is only about half, actually, it's less than half of the people who are under control of the correctional system, because there are all these things that people have to do when they leave prison. So there's probation, there's parole, there's community corrections, and you can't screw up even when you're not behind bars, because you will be sent back to prison in many cases. And that is going back to prison not for committing a crime, but for not following the massive detailed rules that are expected of people who are
Missing a
on some
call
sort
from
of
your PO or what have you.
community supervision. Yes, yes. So that's extremely important to remember when we talk about the population
Yeah, so
of
you have the number of
incarcerated.
people that are incarcerated, but that doesn't include the number of people who are on parole or supervised release. I'm not exactly
That's
sure what
right.
that is.
Yep. Yep. And it also doesn't, it usually, I mean, when people talk about prison, it's either federal or state or tribal, but it doesn't talk about jails. And jails are at the county level, usually sentences of less than a year. So that's another chunk of people, and a lot of women um, land in jails.
As
Jails are
opposed to
even,
prison?
yeah, they're even less well, jails are less well equipped to take care of women's health. Um, there are some pretty egregious things, as you know, probably from the news, that happen in our county jails.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
I also wanted to just
Yeah,
say, because we're talking about birth, the figures are very hard to pin down in terms of how many women are pregnant when they're inside. Um, there was a 2019 study that we rely on. It pegged it at about 4 to 5% of incarcerated women at any one time are pregnant. Um,
so women are 7% of the prison population, but and
yep,
4 to 5% of that number
yep.
is pregnant. Now, is that pregnant when they go in, or do they differentiate?
They really, the data collection about this, just to reinforce the idea that women are neglected or ignored, not really. It's a patchwork. States do it differently. The feds have rules, but states have their own rules, state by state. And of course, state prisons and legislation and crime laws, they vary across the states. So it's extremely difficult to do anything um, across the board. You
Yeah, it's hard
can't.
to. You have the federal rules, and then but every state you got 50, probably 50 different sets of rules
That's
on
right.
data collection and
Yeah. So even though pregnant women are such a tiny part of incarcerated women, if you think just about the organization that I work with in 7 states, 19 facilities, just last year, we delivered 17 babies and served 835 unique clients.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Now, do the doulas do the inmates have to leave the prison to have the baby, or do you facilitate birthing inside the prison?
No, they people go to hospitals, and I don't know this for a fact, but my guess is that that is a legal liability kind of concern because there are no physicians or nurses in the facilities.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
But if it should happen and a doula were there, you know, unless there were some kind of physical complication, um, the doula would be there to support the mom. It's really important, I think, to understand what is the difference between a doula and, for example, a midwife or an OBGYN. Doulas provide physical, emotional, and informational support before, during, and after birth. So we're educating the moms about what's coming. We support them through the birthing process, and then we stay connected to them afterwards. We do not provide medical care. So the what physical support looks like is maybe for a mom who's leaving the facility after giving birth and say her baby is a few months old, living with a relative, we might have to help her find housing if she's having a rough time. That's an example of physical support. The emotional support is very, very powerful. Um, Women often, first being incarcerated and then being in the midst of labor, don't necessarily realize their power to say, no, don't give me any drugs. For example, what if they're recovering from some sort of chemical dependence? And,
Absolutely.
the physician wants to administer some kind of painkiller. And the mom can say no. And a doula can encourage the mom to speak her desire about that.
Yeah, and just because of the way the prison system is built and the control we assume is all within the prison system, and I can see very easily how a woman would say, I can't say, I can't have that, or
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, people are silenced. They're not spoken to with their first name. So it's a very dehumanizing process. And then to dehumanize that sacred moment, I would say, of giving birth, it's incredible.
so. And I think a lot of people have assumptions about women in prison. I think, for example, one of them might be that women and men who are involved in the system follow the same path.
Yeah, not true. Definitely not true. Yeah, women, about half, I think it is. Is that true? About half of women are there for drug or property crimes.
Is
And
that like the Carrie Underwood keying the truck kind of crime?
um, yeah, I don't know where that fits actually because I'm not a.
When you said property crime, I just went there immediately. I don't know
Yeah,
why.
it's more often stealing food, that sort of thing. Um, I think of them as survival crimes. So all of the chemical dependence issues, so drug possession, have to do usually with some kind of early trauma, childhood trauma, and then self medicating because our system of mental health care is so impoverished. Yeah. Um, and so, when I first went into a state prison, I had no idea what to expect. And I saw old women in wheelchairs. I saw people who were unable to speak English and there were no translators for their language. And what that gives rise to is women inside are not always, but often compassionate toward one another.
I
So,
don't know why I was surprised by that, but that's
yeah,
encouraging.
I mean, the idea of a criminal, we think of all the negativity, but we don't think of why. And the system does not care why a person is using drugs or stealing food. Even in the
Yeah.
case of killing a partner, a murder, um, it's totally, it happens often that moms who do that are protecting kids or protecting themselves. So if
Yeah.
there's abuse in the situation, oh, we're just very far behind places like Australia in terms of how we handle this sort of thing.
Yeah, I saw a stat the other day. In 2023, in the state of Minnesota, there were 40 murders related to domestic violence.
Yeah,
And that was a record.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, how about another assumption? Women get what they need in prison.
Oh gosh. Well, go back to the statement I made earlier about prisons being built by and for men. Um, so that's the first problem. Um, I can't even. I used to teach courses about this, and I would ask the students, is a feminist prison possible? Could you have a prison dedicated to the liberation of women? And what would that look like? A
That's a great thought
very,
experiment. Did they?
yes, very challenging. But let's just say that in spite of the legal requirements that the state is responsible for those who are in its custody, healthcare in prisons generally is inadequate. Um, and women's healthcare needs are different than men's. Just take the example of the food that a pregnant woman gets inside. Um,
What do they
yeah.
get?
Well, the usual fare, which is, I would say, unappetizing at best, from what I have seen and tasted. But a pregnant woman might get an extra piece of fruit a day. So she's not getting the calories she needs to grow that baby, nor is she getting nutritional balance. Um, if her family can buy her the multivitamins that pregnant women should take, she can have those.
That's a big if, though, isn't it?
But absolutely, absolutely, yes. Um, so I would say no. In fact, I think that prisons are dangerous places for women. Um, Thinking about custodial rape, thinking about women not getting the mental health care that they need, not getting drug treatment, that sort of thing. And it's
Which
not,
kind of leads us to the next misunderstanding or assumption,
yes,
which is that women are safe when they're incarcerated.
right. No, and I think, yes, custodial rape is a part of that. Another part of it is the way that segregation is used or solitary confinement. That can be used for any kind of punishment. So, what if a woman is unable to give a urine sample when she is asked? If she cannot do that, if she cannot produce that, she might be sent to seg. So it's all about compliance. But also women who have mental health issues. If they act out or have some sort of an episode where they lose control, they might be sent to segregation. And what could be worse than isolating someone who's in a mental health crisis?
For sure. Yeah. Okay. Last one. We're all safer with tough on crime laws.
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, the way I think about this, have talked about it with my students, is to say reminding ourselves that 90 to 95% of the people who are locked up are coming back to the community. How do we want to treat them, interact with them while they're incarcerated? And there is lots of evidence that prisons do not make people less likely to commit crime. Only for people who do sexual predator behavior and the most serious, life-taking kinds of crimes, they are the least likely people to go back to prison. But it's almost as if prison is a schooling for future crime. So it does. People inside are not safer. People outside are not safer. And Mike, there's one other thing I think people should understand about safety. That last question we were talking about women being safer inside. There's been a study actually done at Shakopee, and a paper written about body cavity searches. So many things are attributed to the need for security, but women are subject to body cavity searches. If there's a female corrections officer available, she might be the person to perform it. But most corrections officers are men. So imagine a woman who has just given birth. She comes back to the prison without her baby, and because she's been outside, she must have a body cavity search.
That's so
It
wrong.
is what the I think the right term for it would be state-sponsored sexual assault. State-sponsored
You're not wrong.
sexual violence. So there's a lot of room for humanity, for our becoming more humane. And I this is a personal opinion. I have never found punishment to be that effective in changing people's behavior. I'm much more of a person who offers encouragement and recognition, acknowledgement of people's pain. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yes, there are situations where I think some people belong in prison, like as you were saying. But I just, it's funny. I was watching the news the other night, and they were talking to, and this is a completely different subject, but it kind of ties in. A young Palestinian man um, in Gaza, and his both of his parents and two of his siblings were killed, um, and his home was destroyed. He lost his job. He has nowhere else to go, and for him, Hamas looks like a really good option because they'll pay him money.
Yeah.
And I realize it's an extreme example, but it's kind of the same thing, is it not?
Yeah.
Where, once these people get out of prison, oftentimes, and I don't, male or female, they have trouble finding jobs, they have trouble finding places to live, and it's so much easier just to go back to where they started from.
Yeah. 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 I do think that idea about options being limited, which is in your story about the young man from Gaza, that is not what we think about when we determine punishment, either length or location. We do not think about why people commit crimes. So we do not go to the root of the issue. We are simply putting a Band-Aid temporarily on an oozing, gaping wound in someone's life. And we do it to masses of people. I just don't understand how people could argue that that makes our neighborhoods safer.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's wrap up. Let's talk about resources for people that want to learn more about Ostara,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
and the Prison Policy Initiative. Where can they go to look for that?
Ostara has a website. It's ostarainitiative.org. That website is filled with resources. So there are films, there are members of our staff giving short talks about various aspects of um, what happens for women who are incarcerated. There's also a victim impact statement given by one of the board members, um, and also lots of ways to participate in our work remotely. That is by donating certain um, items that moms and their newborns need when the
So
moms are
not just money, but it's
right.
actual.
No, yeah. When moms are leaving, when their sentence is, Minnesota has the Healthy Start Act, which says if moms are leaving prison within a year, they go to a community setting that's secure with their baby. And so we try to support that. And so rocking chairs and, you know, cribs and all kinds of. Anyway, you can look at the website for that. The Prison Policy Initiative will give ideas, statistical information about incarceration in the nation. They have a wonderful search engine on the Prison Policy Initiative website. And so you can look up things about women. You can look up things about trans people who are incarcerated, which is probably another show. Um,
For sure.
there are lots and lots of ways to learn more. And we also love to come and give talks. Um, you can have a doula come and give a talk to a classroom, a health class, for example, or a social studies class about women's incarceration. We do lots of public speaking, and we love doing it.
That's fantastic. Oh, that's Colleen. Thank you so much. That's going to show up on my. I'll have to. Okay, just like do that kind of clapping. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know you're busy, and I appreciate the time that you spent with us here. There's a lot of information here to think about when we're talking about being kinder to other human beings, and I just appreciate everything you guys do.
Thank you, Mike. I want to add to your the title of your podcast. It says kindness matters, and I would say kindness and humanity matter.
I think they're tied hand in hand, but I won't discount your comment. I'll take that as under advisement.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome, and you have a good week.
I will. You too. Bye now.
I want to thank you for taking this time to listen to this episode with my guest, Colleen Bell, from the Ostara Initiative. I hope you're able to take something positive from the time you spent here today. Maybe you'll be inspired, maybe you'll be motivated, maybe you'll be moved. If you experienced any of those positive feelings, please consider sharing this podcast with your friends and family. I'm always striving to offer a better podcast, so give me some feedback. Let me know how you think I'm doing. Email me, leave a message on my socials. It would mean the world. Also feel free to follow us on our socials like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. This podcast is part of the Mayday Media Network. If you have an idea for a podcast and need some production assistance, or have a podcast and are looking for a supportive network to join, check out MaydayMediaNetwork.com and check out the many different shows like Afrocentric, Spoil My Movie, Generation Mixtape, In a Pickle Radio Show, Wake Up and Dream with D. Anthony Palin, Stacks O'Pax, and The Time Pals. We will be back again next week with a brand new episode, and we would be honored if you would join us. You've been listening to the Kindness Matters podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rathbun. Have a fantastic week.